Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So this week has definitely not gone as I have expected. I definitely did not expect to see any spoilers this week, as spoiler season starts next week. But this week did start with some spoilers with some of the charms, including Maestro's charm, and if you haven't seen that episode, well, check it out at some other time. Don't leave just yet, because that would be rude, number one, and number two, then you wouldn't get to see this absolutely brutal commander named Lord Xander the Collector. And before we jump in today's episode, a huge thank you to Eddie for making me aware of these new cards and for the great discussions around them, and of course, blame Eddie if I make any mistakes, because it's always Eddie's fault, not mine. Now with all that said, let's jump into it. So, Lord Xander the Collector is a 6/6, get ready for it, Vampire Demon Noble that costs 4 blue, black, red. It has, when it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards half the cards in their hand rounded down. Whenever Lord Xander attacks, defending player mills half the cards in their library rounded down. And on top of that, when Lord Xander dies, target opponent sacrifices half the non-land permanents they control rounded down. Yeah, I mean, to call this commander brutal might be an understatement, because all those things are very, 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 well, not so nice to an opponent. So whether Xander is coming into play, dying, or attacking, your opponents are going to be hurting. Now, obviously, you can only target one opponent at a time with this, and we'll actually talk about that here in a bit. But still, it is absolutely devastating to lose half the number of cards in your hand, half of the non-land permanents that you own, and losing half of your library. Now, obviously, this commander has a very high converted mana cost at 7 mana, but still, I bet there's going to be plenty of players out there that are excited to build around this, and that include plenty of ramp in their deck to get this out as quickly as they possibly can to start wreaking havoc on the table. Because once this hits the board, if you're set up properly, it can make an immediate massive impact on the game, and it can be really hard to stop once you get going. And although all of these things are incredibly brutal, of course there are ways to make them even more so, and we'll talk about those just now. So let's talk about that first trigger and ways to use and abuse it. Again, that's the ETB that makes a player discard half their hand rounded down, so of course, blink cards are fantastic with this commander. Cards like Essence Flux, Conjurer's Closet, and Deadeye Navigator. Essence Flux is a simple 1-mana spell that says, exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control if it's a spirit, play +1 counter on it. Now again, Lord Xander is a lot of creature types, not a spirit, but that really doesn't matter. What does matter is that we're having it leave the battlefield and come back so we get that ETB again. Which means that we can make yet another player discard half of their hand. So for 1 mana at instant speed, yeah, that's really good. Especially since we can actually use that in a defensive way if we need to as well to protect our commander, and we'll talk about some other ways to do that here in a bit. Regardless, of course, a repeatable blinking effect like Conjurer's Closet can be even more brutal. It says at the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. So yeah, again, having a consistent way to blink our commander and to get that ETB again and again and again can just make it so our opponents have very little resources, very few cards in their hand to help deal with the situation. So of course, Deadeye Navigator can also be a fantastic card in this deck. It has Soul Bond, and it says, as long as it's paired with another creature each of those creatures has, pay 1 to blue, exile this creature, return to the battlefield under your control. Or in other words, pay 2 mana, target player discards half their hand. And speaking of discarding, of course, we've got plenty of ways that we can benefit from our opponents discarding cards with things like Geth's Grimoire, Waste Not, and Liliana's Caress. Guest Grimoire says, whenever an opponent discards a card from their hand, you may draw a card. This is absolutely incredible card advantage for this deck. Again, every single time our commander comes into play, whether that's, when we cast it, or, whenever we have, a blink effect, or something else we'll talk about here in a bit, we are making an opponent discard cards, and for every single card they discard, we get to draw. So this makes the scales even less even, with an opponent having a lot of card disadvantage while we get card advantage from doing so. Speaking of which, we also have Waste Not, which can provide an absurd amount of value with this stack. It says, whenever an opponent discards a creature card, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, add black/black to your mana pool, and whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. So we're either getting a zombie token to build up an army, we're getting a lot of mana by our opponents discarding lands, or we're drawing even more cards like with Guest Grimoire. And of course, we've got ways that we can punish our opponents even further, to add insult to injury, to rub salt into the wound. How about something like Liliana's Caress? It says whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. So make someone discard a ton of cards and punish them even further for it. Overall, there are a lot of ways to make your opponents discard a lot throughout the game with this commander, and also ways to take advantage of that as well. Next up, now I don't want to gloss over that middle trigger, which again is that attack trigger that's going to make the defending player mill half their library rounded down, because I do think that the other 2 triggers are what more players are probably going to build around and what's more abusable. That being said, 2 cards that combo with that middle trigger to essentially take an opponent out are Bruvak the Grandiloquent. I always trip up over that. Sorry, this is a quick take. Anyways, Frank Sandy is the other one. Bruvak says, if an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill twice that many cards instead. So again, you attack with your commander, they mill half their library rounded down, then they mill that exact same amount again. Now, thank you, Eddie, for pointing this out, and I do want to make sure that you're aware of it. If an opponent has, say, an odd number of cards in their library, again, your commander does say rounded down, so it's not going to mill, exactly the amount that you need to mill that player out. That being said, it is going to get them incredibly close, and obviously, if they do have an even amount of cards in their library, that's going to be every single one of their cards. In a similar way, there's Frank Sandy, which is an Aura Curse, which says enchant player at the beginning of each end step, enchant a player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, where X the number of cards put into that graveyard from anywhere this turn. Basically, doubling up mill on 1 player, and again, yes, this is a fantastic combo with this commander. It is not perfect, but it is a very spicy way to take a player out. But when it comes to this commander, let's turn things up a notch and make things even more brutal for our opponents by bringing into play cards like Molten Echoes, Mirror March, and Flame Shadow Conjuring. Molten Echoes is an enchantment that says, when it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. And in this case, we can choose vampire, demon, or noble. So whatever one of those you want to pick. It says, whenever a non-token creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. That token gains haste, exile at the beginning of the next end step. Now, typically with Molten Echoes, you will see this in a tribal deck. However, this might not be a tribal deck, but it is a deck that can utilize Molten Echoes in an extremely brutal way. So again, when your commander comes into play, you are going to get a token copy of it. That means that you double up on that ETB, making another player discard half their hand rounded down, or if you want to get really mean, that same player. On top of that, again, because of the legend rule, with our commander being legendary, obviously, we are going to have to sacrifice one of these 2, probably the token, and yeah. When we do that, then we are going to get that death trigger as well, which again is forcing an opponent to sacrifice half the non-land permanents they control rounded down. So again, with this in play, with our commander just coming into play once, we double up on that ETB and we double up on our commander's death trigger, which we're going to get right away. And an even bigger play, though, can be with Mirror March, which says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, flip a coin until you lose a flip. For each flip you won, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Those tokens have haste, exile them beginning the next end step. So this one does not guarantee a token copy, but if we keep hitting coin flip after coin flip after coin flip, we are going to be causing a lot of opponents to pull their hair out in frustration. Again, essentially, for every single coin flip that we win, that is an ETB and a death trigger, so discarding and sacrificing. And then Flame Shadow Conjuring is similar. It says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay red. If you do put a token on the battlefield, let's say copy that creature, that token gains haste, exile at the beginning of the next end step. So this one is basically Molten Echoes, but with a slight cost and no restriction to creature type. Regardless, each of these are fantastic in this deck, and of course they can be used and abused further with, say, blink effects again. If you just blink your commander once, you're getting that ETB again and again, and you're also getting that death trigger right away again. And of course, with those cards being effective in this deck, so are cards like Phantasmal Image and Twin Flame and Rite of Replication. Phantasmal Image and basically any other clone is going to be coming into play as a copy of our commander, and yeah, we get that ETB and death trigger right away, and especially with Phantasmal Image being 2 mana, yeah, 2 mana is going to be great for that effect. And speaking of 2 mana, Twin Flame is a fantastic 2 mana spell for this deck. It says choose any number of target creatures you control. For each of them, put a token that's a copy of that creature on the battlefield. Those tokens have haste, exile them, begin the next end step. Now, we can pay 2 in a red for more targets beyond the first with that strive cost, but yeah, for most part, we're probably just going to be paying 2 mana to make an opponent discard half their hand and sacrifice half their permanents. Sorry, misspoke right there. I meant non-land permanents. Regardless. Anyways, Rite of Replication is obviously a massive card in this deck as well. It's got kicker for 5, and if you kicked it, you get 5 tokens of a creature. So have fun with 5 ETBs and 5 death triggers as well. And speaking of death triggers, blink spells are incredibly impactful for this deck, but even more so are return to the battlefield spells or bring back spells. I don't know what we exactly call these spells, but they start to come out more and more often with cards like Return to Action. This one just came out in Kamigawa, and yeah, there are plenty of cards like it. It says, until end of turn, target creature gets +1/+0 and gains lifelink, and when this creature dies, returns to the battlefield tapped out of its owner's control. So when our commander is about to die, we simply cast this for 2 mana, our commander dies, we get that fantastically brutal death trigger, then our commander just comes back, as if nothing happened. Oh wait, except also we get an ETB as well then. So our commander comes right back and we've got an extra ETB and we can get that death trigger again. Now, of course, outside of these return to action type cards, make sure you're also considering cards like Undying Evil, which can give our commander Undying, and Cauldron of Souls, which can give it Persist. Each are fantastic ways to bring our commander back again. Undying Evil only costs a single mana, and Cauldron of Souls is a repeatable effect. So again, once we're set up properly, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be really hard to stop us because we are demolishing our opponent's resources over and over and over again. Speaking of which, we can force the demolishing of our opponent's resources by sacrificing our own commander to get that death trigger with things like Viscera Seer, Sadistic Hypnotist, and Thought Picker Witch. Viscera Seer is a fantastic sacrifice outlet. It says sacrifice a creature, scry 1. This low-to-the-ground sacrifice outlet can stay in play and provide us a lot of card selection throughout the game, again with that scry 1, and yeah, being able to do that for free is absolutely incredible with our commander because just at will, we can sacrifice it to actually, make a player that sacrifice half their non-land permanents. And of course, again, if we've got one of those return-to-action type spells, we are getting that commander back for that ETB, and if we want to do the death trigger again, we can. An even more brutal sacrifice outlet for this deck, though, has got to be Sadistic Hypnotist. It says sacrifice a creature, target player discards 2 cards, activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. So this can help us take out even more cards from our opponent's hands, and yeah, this can be a great way to finish off what little cards they have left in their hand. On top of that, another sacrifice outlet that I wanted to highlight is Thought Picker Witch, which has pay 1, sacrifice a creature, look at the top 2 cards of the target opponent's library, then remove 1 of them from the game. Again, once we're set up properly, we can essentially fate seal our opponents out of the game. We just take out their resources in play, we take out their hands, and then we start taking out cards off the top of their library and just give them dead cards. There is a reason why I keep saying that this commander is brutal, and it is pretty apparent with, what you can do with it. And of course, we can double up on any of these brutal effects with something like Strionic Resonator. It's an artifact that has pay 2, tap, copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So whether that's the ETB, the attack trigger, or the death trigger, our opponents are going to be hurting with this. 2 extra mana is going to be well worth making another opponent have to discard half their hand, or sacrifice half their non-land permanents, or, mill half their library. But yeah, overall, I definitely did not expect to see a commander this brutal, well, especially this early. This is still pre-spoiler season, technically. Spoiler season doesn't officially start till April 7th. But yeah, I guess in a set that's all about crime, there's going to be some pretty brutal things, apparently. And yeah, Lord Xander, the Collector, has started things off on a pretty brutal note. Again, once you're set up properly, it is going to be very hard to stop you, because even if another player tries to take out Lord Xander, that might actually even benefit you. Again, if you've got one of those Lord Return to Action cards, or, ways to double up on that ETB or Death Trigger with things like Molten Echoes. Yeah, there are some cards that I think are going to be in high demand with this commander coming out. And keep in mind also, if you are one of those players that wants to mill someone out, make sure you keep in mind, Bruvac, which I think is an expensive-ish card. It was in the list. I think it's around $15 or so. And yeah, Frank Sandy, which I think is around $5 or so right now. But yeah, there might be some players out there that really want to mill people out in one swing, and those allow you to do that with this commander. And again, like I've mentioned in a couple of the price spike episodes I've talked about recently, if you are excited about this commander and you want to build around it, you might want to think about picking up cards sooner rather than later, because, well, some cards might spike in price. So, of course, with that, and I'm going to try to remember to do this when I can, I've included a link in the description to the cards in this episode, just in case you want easy access to those cards. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again, and have a good one.